The scent of white hydrangeas and expensive Chardonnay should have made the night perfect. It was my engagement party, held in the solarium of my parents' estate, a room with glass walls that looked out over the manicured gardens I'd grown up in. Julian, my fiancé, was holding my hand, his thumb tracing calming circles on my skin. He knew I was on edge. He knew that beneath the soft jazz and the polite laughter of 50 guests, the air was toxic. My family wasn't celebrating me. They were tolerating me. The ambush had started 2 weeks earlier. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a dinner they hadn't asked for, when my mother slid into the room. She wore her negotiation face, a tight, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know, she had started, smoothing the granite countertop. Caleb's wedding is coming up in October. I didn't look up. I know, Mom. It's going to be beautiful. It could be, she sighed theatrically. But the venue he wants in Cabo, it's incredibly pricey. And frankly, you haven't touched that investment account Grandpa Arthur left you. I froze. The knife hovered over a bell pepper. That's my wedding fund. Grandpa left it specifically for me. Well, you and Julian are so simple, my father had walked in then, closing the trap. You could do a backyard thing. Caleb is marrying into the Vanderbilts. He needs to make a statement. We need you to lend us the money. Lend? I asked, turning to face them. Or give. Does it matter? Dad snapped. He's your brother. He's the heir. You have a duty to this family to ensure we look good. Don't be selfish, Alara. Selfish. I worked 60-hour weeks. I paid my own bills. I drove a 5-year-old sedan while Caleb drove a Porsche they leased for him. And now they wanted the one thing that was solely mine. No, I said. The Cold War began that instant. For 14 days, they ignored me, froze me out, and badmouthed me to aunts and uncles. But I stood my ground. Julian kept me sane. You don't owe them your future, he'd whispered when I cried in the bathroom. But I never expected them to escalate it in public. The engagement party was supposed to be a truce. It wasn't. Caleb arrived an hour late, stumbling, his tie undone, clearly 3 drinks deep. He tossed his blazer onto the cake table, nearly knocking over the tiered vanilla confection. My father didn't reprimand him. Instead, he locked eyes with me from across the room. He walked over, his face flushed with a mixture of scotch and suppressed rage. He grabbed my elbow, his grip bruising. We need to talk, he hissed. Not now, I whispered, trying to pull away without causing a scene. Dad, please. People are watching. I don't care, he snarled, his voice rising. You're embarrassing this family. Look at your brother, he's stressed out of his mind because you're hoarding money you don't even deserve. The music stopped. The chatter died. Julian stepped in, placing a hand on my dad's chest. Sir, let go of her. Back off, Dad shoved Julian hard enough that he stumbled. He turned back to me, his eyes wild. You ungrateful little brat. I gave you everything. Give him the money, or so help me God. No, I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for the room to hear. I won't fund his lifestyle anymore. The slap sounded like a gunshot. It echoed off the glass walls. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burning as if he'd branded me. My pearl earring flew off, skittering across the marble floor. Time suspended. I heard my mother gasp, but it wasn't a gasp of horror, it was a gasp of annoyance, as if I'd just spilled red wine on a rug. Caleb snickered from the corner, taking a sip of his drink. Julian was on him in a second, shoving my father back, trembling with fury. You just struck your daughter, Julian shouted, his voice cracking. On her engagement night. She asked for it, Dad spat, adjusting his cuffs. She's forgotten her place. This is my house. My rules. I stood there, my hand cupping my swelling cheek, looking at the man who had raised me. And in that moment, the daughter who desperately wanted their approval died. She just ceased to exist. Let's go, I whispered to Julian. We walked out. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't look back. I left them in the silence of their own making. The next morning, I woke up in our apartment with a throbbing headache and a clarity I had never felt before. My phone was silent. No apologies. No texts. They were betting on my silence. They were betting that I would come crawling back, desperate to repair the rift I had caused. You need to press charges, Julian said, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. No, I said, staring at the steam rising from the mug. That's too messy. And it's too quick. I stood up and walked to the small fireproof safe in our closet. I dialed the combination, Grandpa Arthur's birthday, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My parents had forgotten about this. Or maybe they just assumed Grandpa Arthur was as dismissive of me as they were. But Grandpa saw everything. Before he died, he sat me down and said, Alara, they love the status more than the blood. One day, they'll forget you. When they do, remind them who holds the keys. Inside the envelope was the property deed to the estate. The house my parents lived in. The house where my father had just slapped me. It wasn't in his name. It wasn't in my mother's. Grandpa had bypassed them entirely, transferring the title to me 5 years ago to protect the asset from my father's gambling debts. I was the landlord. They were the squatters. I called my lawyer, a shark named Harper who had been waiting for this call. Do it, I told her. I didn't start with an eviction. I started with a notification of ownership review. A simple, terrifying letter on thick legal bond paper. 2 days later, my mother called. Alara, what is this garbage? She shrieked. Some clerk sent a letter saying the house is under review? It's a mistake. It's not a mistake, Mom, I said, my voice ice cold. Check the title holder. What are you talking about? Your father owns this house. No, I corrected. I own it. Grandpa left it to me. Dad has just been a guest. The silence on the other end was heavy enough to crush a car. You wouldn't, she whispered. I tried to be a daughter, I said. I tried to be family. But then Dad slapped me in front of 50 people because I wouldn't pay for Caleb's vacation. Guests who assault the landlord get evicted. You can't do this. We have nowhere to go. Your father's heart condition. My cheek condition is healing nicely, thanks for asking, I interrupted. You have 30 days. I hung up. I didn't stop there. Julian and I went to Caleb's wedding. I wore a white pantsuit, sharp, tailored, and aggressive. I didn't sit in the family pew. I stood at the back. When Caleb saw me at the reception, he smirked, sauntering over with his new bride. Glad you came to your senses, he laughed. Dad's still pissed, but he'll get over it if you cut the check. I leaned in close, smelling the expensive cologne he bought with money he didn't earn. Enjoy the honeymoon, Caleb, I whispered. Because when you get back, Mom and Dad will be moving into your guest room. I sold the estate this morning. His smile vanished. You what? A developer bought it. They're tearing it down to build condos. The bulldozer arrives in 2 weeks. I walked away before he could respond. The fallout was nuclear. My phone blew up. Threats, begging, crying voicemails from my father claiming he was just trying to teach me a lesson. I blocked them all. When the sheriff arrived to enforce the vacate order, I was there. I watched from my car parked across the street. I saw my mother crying as she hauled boxes of her designer clothes into a U-Haul. I saw my father, red-faced and screaming at the officers, looking small and powerless. They saw me. They ran toward my car, banging on the window. How could you? My dad screamed, tears streaming down his face. We gave you life. I rolled the window down 2 inches. And you tried to break my spirit. Call it a trade. I rolled the window up and drove away. 3 months later, the dust had settled, but the emotional debris remained. Trauma isn't a switch you can flip off just because you won. I received a letter in the mail, handwritten by my mother. Alara, we are living in Caleb's basement. It is humid and small. You have destroyed your family. Are you happy? Does this vengeance keep you warm at night? I read it twice. Then I dropped it into the fireplace and watched the paper curl into ash. No, I said to the empty room. It doesn't keep me warm. My self-respect does. 2 weeks later, the universe balanced the scales. I received a call from the CEO of a major philanthropic firm in Chicago. He had heard about my work in housing equity and, through the grapevine, about the fortitude I'd shown in my personal life. We need someone who doesn't blink when things get hard, he told me. We want you to run the West Coast division. Julian and I packed up. We moved to Seattle, leaving the ghosts of my childhood behind. A year later, I was back in my hometown for a conference. I hadn't planned on seeing anyone, but fate has a sense of humor. I ran into Caleb outside a convenience store. He looked 10 years older. His Porsche was gone, replaced by a dented sedan. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at my tailored coat, the quiet confidence in my posture. You really did it, he muttered. You really burned it all down. I didn't burn anything, I said calmly. I just stopped keeping you all warm by setting myself on fire. Mom misses you, he lied. Mom misses the money, I corrected. Tell her I said hello. And tell her the new development on the old estate looks beautiful. I didn't wait for his response. The old estate was gone. In its place, I had worked with the developer to allocate a portion of the land for a specialized purpose. It wasn't condos. I had used the proceeds from the sale to fund a shelter for women escaping domestic abuse. It was called the Rose House, named after the grandmother who had been too afraid to leave her own husband. Every now and then, I check the website. I see the photos of women finding safety, finding their voices, finding the strength to walk away. My parents lost a house they didn't appreciate. But 100 women gained a home where they would never, ever be silenced. That was the legacy I choose. Not revenge. Rebirth. Join the echoes of revenge. Subscribe, like, and share. Together, we turn pain into power.